Number 5 on this list is Sinkhole Sam. The legend of Sinkhole Sam originated many years ago in Kansas. Sinkhole Sam is said to live in Inman Lake, or as the locals call it, the Sinkhole. It's believed to be a 15-foot long serpent-like creature that is as round, and I quote, as an automobile tire. The people who claim that this serpent was 15 feet and round like an automobile tire are Albert Newfield and George Rager, two witnesses of the beast. These men are some of the many people who have stumbled upon this creature and have spoken out about it. Based on the reports, people believe that Sinkhole Sam is a type of prehistoric serpent that has managed to survive over the years. Now, back before Kansas was even colonized, there were lakes and rivers all over the terrain, making it a perfect spot for an animal like this to survive. As time went on, the area dried up and locals believe that Sinkhole Sam took up residence in Inman Lake. As the years have passed though, the sightings of Sam at Inman Lake have been fewer and farther between. However, the sightings of a similar creature at the Kingman State Lake have grown. This lake isn't too far from Inman Lake either, only 50 miles. 50 miles is certainly a long distance to go, but maybe not for a massive serpent like Sam. Sinkhole Sam, in my opinion, is one of the most likely creatures to actually exist. Unlike other sea beasts that are very far from any living animals that we have in our world, Sinkhole Sam, from most accounts, is just a big snake. I think it's super possible that someone has spotted a massive snake over the years in that lake, and through word of mouth, the story has been exaggerated over the time to become the legend of Sinkhole Sam. Now, if Sam is real, then we should all be in the clear, because even though a 15-foot serpent may be terrifying, there have been no reported attacks from Sinkhole Sam on humans since the legend began. Number 4 on this list is Livyatan Melvillei. This ancient beast is aptly named after the Leviathan due to its incredible size. This is a monstrous whale that grew from 45 feet to 60 feet in length. It has the largest teeth from any animal used to eat the world has ever seen, reaching a length of 1.18 feet. Their heads were 10 feet long and their jaws were absolutely massive. Similar to Megalodon, these creatures are long extinct and lived roughly 12 million years ago. Also similarly to Megalodon, they had the exact same diet as the massive shark, whales. That's right guys, this massive whale ate other smaller whales. Also, because it was competing for the same food source as Megalodon, it's not unrealistic to think that those two creatures would have fought several times. And before I go any further about this beast, comment down below who you have in a fight, Megalodon or this Leviathan of whales. I want to know who you guys got. Anyways, over the years we've seen many legends about massive whales that were extremely aggressive. Moby Dick is one of the most famous stories of all time and features a massive whale. This creature, however, would have put Moby Dick to shame and potentially would have even had it for lunch. Also, after it was finished eating Moby Dick, it would have happily eaten Captain Ahab and completely demolished his whaling ship. A lot of other entries on this list have had some reported sightings and witnesses, but this one we have real fossils to prove its actual existence. I've personally always been a fan of whales. In fact, an orca whale is my favorite animal in the whole world, but making an orca whale 60 feet with massive teeth is what we have here, and that might be a bit too much for me if I'm being honest. Number 3 on this list is Ningen. Ningen are very strange mythical creatures that have only come into the limelight very recently. The rumors and legends of these creatures have largely taken place in Japan. Japanese whale research boats that are sent to the Arctic waters have reported seeing these massive 20 to 30 meter long creatures that are completely white swimming through the ocean. Now, when I first heard that, I thought that these things might just be big whales, but their shape is unlike anything that we've ever seen before. These creatures are said to look almost human, with witnesses saying that they saw massive legs and arms coming from the beast. They also have eyes and a mouth, but not many other facial features from the reports. For just over the last decade, stories about Ningen in the Antarctic waters have circulated throughout Japan. One of the most famous was when crew members on the deck of a ship saw what they thought was a submarine in the distance, but when they approached it, realized the creature was alive and watched as it dived quickly underwater. There are some photos that have surfaced on the internet, but nothing that can fully substantiate the claims of this creature's existence. It is also currently unknown if there's only one of these creatures or if there are several of them swimming around the seas. This beast, unlike some of the other creatures that we've talked about, is not just a bigger version of an already existing animal. It isn't just a big snake or a big shark, it's a completely different entity entirely. This makes me think that it would be harder for somebody to confuse a big whale with a creature like this, because a whale, doesn't look anything like a Ningen. Hopefully more sightings and evidence can come to light soon, and we can get a definitive confirmation if this thing is real or not. Number 2 on this list is the Oklahoma octopus. This mythical octopus is said to inhabit some of the bigger lakes in Oklahoma, like Lake Thunderbird, Ulaga Lake, and Lake 10 Killer. The sightings indicate that this is a very large, aggressive octopus that we wouldn't want to mess with. Many deaths in these lakes have been linked to this octopus, or octopi if there are multiple of them. What's very strange about this creature and what makes a lot of people skeptical is that typically octopi don't live in freshwater areas. They're capable of doing it for a short time, but they never live there for extended periods. That being said, there have still been multiple sightings and reports of this creature living in these lakes. It's said to be the size of a horse and has a reddish-brownish skin tone to it. It eats what any other octopus would eat, but has a tendency to kill humans in its area. The reasoning behind this is unknown though, because it doesn't actually eat the humans, but only drowns them. Potentially the octopus feels threatened by humans swimming in its water and is very territorial. There's no physical evidence proving the existence of this creature, but the rate of drownings in these 3 lakes that I mentioned earlier, they're far higher than anywhere else in the area. That statistic, along with the numerous sightings from fishermen and swimmers, have locals believing in the legend of the Oklahoma octopus. Number 1 on this list is Organism 46b. Organism 46b is believed to be a massive 33-foot long squid-like creature that was said to have 14 different tentacles. This thing lived in Vostok Lake, which is a subglacial lake located under 2 entire miles of ice. This creature has the ability to animate its legs after they've been amputated, it's capable of shape-shifting, it's extremely intelligent and also extremely hostile, and it has the ability to immobilize its prey with a toxin that it could spray up to 150 feet. We've only actually known about this creature for a few years. Although the Russians initially established an Antarctic base on top of Vostok Lake in 1957, they actually weren't aware that there was a lake beneath them until 1974, and then they weren't able to get to the lake until 2012. It was only after that that they discovered Organism 46b. After they drilled all the way through the ice and got to a point where they could send divers down there, they discovered this creature. Sadly, the discovery was a deadly one though. Dr. Anton Padalka, a researcher at the site, is quoted saying, "He tread water wearing a blissful smile as the organism approached him. We watched helplessly as it used its arms to tear off its head, then popped its remains in its mouth. It was as if it had hypnotized him telepathically." This ability to completely lull its prey into a sense of calm is apparently what this creature's venomous spray is capable of doing to people. Padalka had some more interactions with this beast, but it didn't take long before the Russian government came into the mix and sent a specialized team into Vostok Lake to extract the organism. The fact that any of this news even made it to the public is pretty marvelous, considering the Russian government wanted to keep it under wraps as much as they could. Hopefully there aren't any more of these dangerous beasts lurking in the subglacial waters waiting to strike. Number 5 on this list is Merlin. Merlin is known to most these days as being a famous mythical wizard that helped King Arthur in the 5th and 6th century. Many of us understand though that Merlin is a fictional character and was written into the Arthurian legends by British author Geoffrey of Monmouth. The character, as described by the History Collection website, is born of a devil intended as the Antichrist. Merlin becomes a close advisor but is eventually undone by his own lust and innate evil. Tricked by one of his female students after teaching her all of his knowledge, Merlin is trapped within a magical prison and left to die. Now that's the very bare bones of Merlin, but already after hearing that, it becomes clear that Merlin, at least how he was written, he can't actually have existed because modern logic tells us that magical prisons and being born from the Antichrist, well, it isn't real. That being said, even though some of Merlin's capabilities may have been exaggerated, I'm here to tell you that he did actually exist. He didn't exist how you may have imagined him to though, and that's because his character was based off of not just one person, but actually 2. Myrddin Wyllt and Ambrosius Aurelianus are 2 figures in medieval Welsh history and lore. The first one, Myrddin Wyllt, was said to be a poet, prophet, and also a madman. He's said to have been a very wise and eccentric hermit who fled into the forest after the Battle of Arfderydd. The second one, Ambrosius Aurelianus, was a war leader who defeated the Anglo-Saxons in a critical battle in the late 5th century. When we put these 2 people together, we get the wise, eccentric, and intelligent battle-tested Merlin who aids Arthur along his journey. Therefore, Merlin is actually a real person who did exist. It just so happens he's two people who both lived wildly different and super interesting lives. Number 4 on this list is Paris of Troy. The son of King Priam and Queen Hecuba of Troy, also played by Orlando Bloom in the 2004 war adventure movie Troy, which I highly recommend you see if you haven't already. Brad Pitt is phenomenal. Paris is a figure from ancient legend. The Prince of Troy during the legendary conflict written about in Homer's Iliad, Paris' actions lay the groundwork for the Trojan War. The face that launched 1,000 ships is often a saying used to describe Helen of Troy, but the only reason that those ships launched in the first place was because of Paris. Helen was initially the wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta. It's said that she and Paris fell in love, and Paris stole her away from Menelaus, bringing her back to Troy. This caused Menelaus to go to his brother Agamemnon and beg him to attack the famous city, and thus began one of the most famous wars in human history. Along with stealing away Helen's love, Paris is also famously known for killing the demigod Achilles. Paris is said to have shot Achilles with an arrow right in his one weak spot, his heel. Now, for a long time, the existence of Paris was debated by historians, but it's now believed pretty much throughout the whole historic community that he was a real person who lived. In Homer's Iliad, there's a lot of divine intervention that happens with Paris, and historians aren't totally convinced all of that happened, with many of them believing some events to be exaggerated, but Paris was definitely a prince of Troy, and he definitely played a big role in the fighting that occurred. One thing that's still debated is the truth behind his and Helen's love. Some historians aren't convinced that it actually happened, but the face that launched 1,000 ships is one of the coolest sayings ever, so I'm just gonna choose to believe it in this one. Number 3 on this list is the Amazons. The Amazons, according to Google, were a group of female warriors and hunters who matched men in physical agility and strength, in archery, riding skills, and the arts of combat. This differs a little bit from the legends in mythology about the Amazons. In Greek mythology, it was believed that these legendary women were the daughters of Ares, the god of war. They were part of a woman-only society, with men specifically being used for breeding purposes and all male infants being killed at birth. In mythology as well, these women didn't just match men in fighting prowess, but they were legendary warriors, intimidating to any and all people that opposed them. Now, as you're probably expecting, these Amazon warriors, they were real, but the first description of them is far more accurate than the mythological description. Some historians have contested their existence, arguing that the bodies of long-haired males who didn't have any facial hair were confused with females after their death. But this explanation has largely been put to bed due to some recent archaeological findings. Burial sites have been found with just the remains of Sarmatian female warriors. Sarmatians were an Iranian group that existed in the 4th and 5th century and have been linked to the legend of the Amazons before. Their fighting style is very similar to what has been described in legend about these ancient female warriors, and since the discovery of these burial sites, it's not unrealistic to believe that female warrior troops existed in this culture. Similar to some of the other entries on this list, some things about them may have been exaggerated, but there's no denying that there were definitely some elite female warriors hundreds of years ago. Number 2 on this list is King Midas. King Midas is potentially the most famous ruler in Greek mythology. Often associated with the territory of Phrygia, Midas reigned in the ancient world. His leadership over this area isn't typically what people know about King Midas though. Most people know him as the guy who was able to turn things into gold. The legend details King Midas as an extremely greedy ruler with a hunger for wealth. After saving a satyr named Silnius, he asks for the power to turn everything he touches into gold. This is granted to him, and for some time Midas rejoices at his newfound ability. The joy of this power, it's short-lived though, because he soon realizes the agony his greed has caused. His daughter was inadvertently murdered by him, and his people were suffering. The gods eventually show him some mercy though, after repenting for all of his sins and his greed. Now, first things first, there was never a man that lived that could touch something and turn it into gold. For thousands of years, people have tried to do this, and it's just simply impossible. This story is no exception. However, King Midas was a real person who actually existed. There was a King Midas who ruled over the region of Phrygia and lived in the late 8th century BCE. It's said that he married a Greek princess and became one of the wealthiest rulers in all of history. It's this overwhelming wealth that likely led to the legend of him being able to turn something to gold just by touching it. It's also very possible that his greed and hunger for wealth wasn't exaggerated, but were actually real characteristics of the king himself. Anyone with the amount of wealth that Midas reportedly had becomes the envy of others, and that is exactly what happened here. Midas was eventually attacked by the Cimmerians and lost. It's said that he killed himself by drinking bull's blood right as his city was being sacked. Number 1 on this list is Robin Hood. Robin Hood may just be the most popular folklore legend in all of history. Countless stories, movies, TV shows, they've been made about this unusual bandit over the years. The legend of Robin Hood began in the 13th century and really picked up steam by the 15th century. Robin Hood, a bandit and thief, is said to parade around England with his band of merry men and lover Maid Marian. Dressed in bright green and one of the most skilled archers in history, Robin Hood and his band of thieves were said to steal from the rich and give back to the poor. This was also in defiance to the Sheriff of Nottingham and Prince John, since Robin Hood remained loyal to the rightful ruler of the area, King Richard. Now, there have been so many stories of Robin Hood told over the years that it's really hard to know which of his escapades are actually true and which are just like blatant lies. The actual legend of Robin Hood, though, is actually based on a real person. Historians, however, currently don't know exactly who this legend is based off of, largely because the name Robin was super common back then. Also, the word hood, spelled H-U-D-E, meant somebody who wore a hood over their head. So basically, guys, we're looking for somebody named Robin, which is a super common name, who wore a hood over their head, which was a super common practice. This is why we don't know exactly who the legend is based off of, but historians do have some educated guesses. The leading theory is with a man named Robin of York. Robin of York lived in the early 1200s and has very similar characteristics to Robin Hood. He was in a position of power, was then stripped of all of his status and assets, and then turned to a life of thievery and became a bandit. Whether he gave back to the poor, or had a band of merry men with him, or had a rivalry with the sheriff, that's all unknown. However, his existence is confirmed. Therefore, Robin Hood did actually exist, we just don't know exactly who the real Robin Hood was. Number 5 on this list is Imhotep. Imhotep is one of the most known and worshipped Egyptian gods in history. He was said to be the god of medicine, and you may know him today as the antagonist in the Mummy movies that starred Brendan Fraser. Imhotep was most talked about and worshipped in roughly 500 BC. In fact, Britannica writes, Imhotep's cult reached its zenith during Greco-Roman times when his temples in Memphis and on the island of Philae in the Nile River were often crowded with sufferers who prayed and slept there with the conviction that the god would reveal remedies to them in their dreams. What's absolutely insane about all this was that 2,000 years prior, Imhotep was a real guy. We don't know too much about how he was as a man, but some things can be assumed based on how he was worshipped. One thing we do know for sure was that he was born in the 27th century BCE. It's thought that Imhotep worked as the chief minister in the Egyptian king's court while he was alive. This is confirmed by an inscription on an ancient Egyptian statue of the king where it references Imhotep. Being part of the court wasn't Imhotep's only stately duties though. It's thought that he was the chief architect to the step pyramid at the necropolis, and potentially what he's most known for was that he was a practicing physician. It's believed that Imhotep was an ancient doctor and would have been the most widely regarded doctor of his time. The legend of Imhotep and his ancient healing ways would have snowballed as time went on, and eventually over 2,000 years later, he was deified and had full-on cults worshipping him. Who knows? Maybe after you die, if you've lived a great life, groups will start worshipping you 2,000 years down the line. I guess we can only hope. Number 4 on this list is Dracula. Count Dracula is the fictional blood-sucking vampire who lives in Transylvania and stars in his own novel, Dracula, written by Bram Stoker. The book Dracula is one of the most famous English novels in the history of writing. Countless movies, TV shows, spin-offs, video games, and other pop culture things have been inspired by the original novel that's been scaring many since its first publication. Although Dracula, with his magic and mythical vampiric abilities, is certainly made up, the character was inspired by a real-life man who wasn't that far off in some aspects to the Count. Vlad the Impaler. Vlad the Impaler is the nickname that he's gotten due to his horrific actions that he committed while he was alive, but his real name is Vlad Dracula. Vlad Dracula is said to be one of the cruelest leaders to ever be in a position of power. He served as the king to Wallachia several times and was constantly engaging in conflicts with his enemies. The biggest enemy that he made for himself was the Ottoman Empire. When Vlad was a child, his father took him and his brother to a meeting with the Ottomans, and this meeting turned out to be a trap. Vlad and his brother were kept as prisoners, and their father was forced to leave them behind. They were taught and raised here, but they were also tortured and grew a great resentment towards the Ottomans. It also didn't help that the Ottomans did eventually kill their dad anyways, something that the two boys weren't exactly fond of. Vlad went on to become a Romanian icon. He had their best interests at heart even though it was at the cost of everyone else. He's best known for impaling victims. This is where you take a long, sharp object and shove it vertically through someone's body. What I was unaware of though is that oftentimes you did this while the person was still alive and it could take hours to actually die. Truly a horrible way to go. NPC News writes, though Dracula may seem like a singular creation, Stoker in fact drew inspiration from a real-life man with an even more grotesque taste for blood. Vlad III, Prince of Wallachia, or as he's better known, Vlad the Impaler, a name he earned for his favorite way of dispensing with his enemies. Therefore, Dracula and his evil intentions did actually exist in a way. He may not have been sucking people's blood, but honestly, with how nuts Vlad the Impaler actually was, I wouldn't even put it past him. Number 3 on this list is the Berserkers. The Berserkers were a group of Viking fighters who, as you may have guessed, went berserk. In fact, they went so berserk that the legends say they weren't even humans anymore. The history collection describes them as great warriors appearing through the Norse sagas. Berserkers were soldiers who possessed the ability in battle to transform themselves into bestial forms and endure inhuman levels of pain. First recorded by the Romans, meeting Trajan's column in Dacia in the 2nd century BCE, Berserkers supposedly served as the elite vanguard of Harald Fairhair during his unification of Norway in the late 9th and early 10th centuries. Following these immense exertions, such warriors would subsequently enter into a prolonged period of weakness lasting for several hours or even days, during which time they could succumb from their ordeal. Believe it or not, these berserkers were real, just not exactly how the legends say they were. These Viking warriors didn't turn into literal beasts, they just became beasts on the battlefield. They would often enter this trance-like state of pure aggression where all they knew how to do was kill. This state where they were going berserk was thought to be caused by some hallucinogenic drugs that the Vikings would take prior to entering combat. Robin Raven writes in an article about the subject, they were careless in their fury, leading many historians to think that they used mind-altering substances to hype themselves up for battle. Berserkers may have felt as though nothing could hurt them. I personally can't even imagine going up in battle against a bunch of crazy dudes who'd been nicknamed the Berserkers and were thought to turn into animals while fighting. It's no wonder the Vikings were some of the most feared fighters in all of history. Number 2 on this list is King Arthur. King Arthur may not have ripped a powerful sword from a stone or been accompanied by Merlin, who was actually a real person that we talked about in the first part of this series, by the way, but it is believed that he was a real man. Arthur was very likely a real man who ruled during the Dark Ages and helped get rid of the Anglo-Saxons from the British Isles. Arthur was one of the most popular legends in the Middle Ages. His adventures were vast and included the likes of the Holy Grail, his magical sword Excalibur, and the slaying of beasts and demons throughout the land, rescuing damsels in distress along the way. Most of this probably isn't true, but it was definitely based on someone. The history collection once again writes, the historical basis of King Arthur remains uncertain. Although some historians contend Arthur never existed at all, the prevailing opinion has coalesced around the opinion that he likely did, but we nevertheless know little about his life. Both the Historia Brittonum and Annales Cambria reference Arthur as a genuine historical figure, leading the Romano-British against the invading Anglo-Saxons during the 5th and early 6th centuries. His involvement at the Battle of Badon in particular is supportable, but also exemplifies the problematic nature of the historical narrative, recording he personally slew an unreasonably large 960 men. So 960 men is a lot, but it's possible that instead of Arthur slaying them single-handedly, he organized a great tactical battle and his troops did this instead. What's really interesting to me is that King Arthur and Merlin are both based on real people, work extremely close together in the stories, and yet never met each other in real life. Potentially they did meet at some point in real life and it was just never documented, thus beginning the legends that would run rampant in the Middle Ages for years to come. Number 1 on this list is Jesus. The fact that I didn't include Jesus in my first part of this video series is honestly kind of ridiculous if you think about it. Jesus is probably the most talked about mythical figure in all of history. Born from the Virgin Mary and conceived by the Holy Spirit, Jesus is basically the main character character in the Christian religion. Wars have been fought over him, countless stories have been told of him, and miracles have been credited to him. With some people on this list, there's still some debate on whether they're real or not, but with Jesus, it's definitely confirmed. Jesus of Nazareth was born in 4 BCE and is confirmed by many writings and gospels through history. He gathered a group of followers and preached throughout the Roman territories until the authorities of these territories grew frustrated with him. Betrayed by one of his close followers, Jesus was eventually put to death by crucifixion from the order of Pontius Pilate. After his death is when the biggest controversy that most of you have likely heard about takes place. His resurrection. Locked away in a cave with a massive boulder shoved on the front of it, it's believed that after 3 days, Jesus' body was resurrected, moved the boulder aside, and rose up to heaven to be with God. It's also been thrown around that while Jesus was alive, he could perform various miracles, like bringing people back from the dead, which gave him such a big following to begin with. These claims are currently unconfirmed and probably won't ever be proven one way or the other. However, the fact that Jesus of Nazareth was a real person, a figure that is still worshipped and followed to this day, that's very true.